Hey everybody, thanks for watching the podcast. Today we have Christopher George, also known as Ceegee. He's a Twitch streamer and 500 NL Zoom player on PokerStars. We get into sort of his background, how he started, what his poker journey's been like, meaning of success to different poker players, what it means to pursue that success. We talk about different ways of strategically approaching the game. There is a point where you'll notice that the conversation transitions. We did reshoot one part of the conversation, and we tried to get into the different ways of approaching simplifying the game and whether or not it's worth it to attempt to simplify or not. And in our initial pass of this topic, the conversation got a little convoluted and we got a little too wrapped up in some of the details. So we found it not as interesting. So we reshot it and we both agree that the reshoot is much better. So when you see that transition happen, that's why. But now I bring you CG. CG, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, your name is Chris. Your actual name is Chris. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah.
Chris George. Is that why you go by? I'm assuming that's why you go by CG. Like,
Yeah, the
most.
initials. It's a very creative screen name on Stars that I created I don't know, probably 2009, 2010.
Yeah, you've been around poker for a while. So, I had never heard of you until I started getting in the streaming space myself, and then started seeing you stream. So, as a just an intro, why don't you tell us like how did you get started in poker? Like, what's your story? How long you been playing, etc.
Sure. So I got started in poker uh from a friend who was notorious in poker for a little while actually. His name was online name was Grimstar.
Mm.
Uh which is what kind of kickstarted me into online poker. But previous to online poker, I used to just play sit and goes with my friends from high school. We just swapped between our friends' houses. I would go over to one friend's house and we would play table games, go over to another friend's house and we'd have like a little sit and go tournament for $5. And growing up, I really didn't have much money, if at all any. And so these tournaments were kind of a big thing for me, like a $5 tournament for 10 people, and sometimes there'd be rebuys. If you won the tournament, it was like, wow, $60 like for the week, like that could pay for like so many lunches. Um, if I need that as a backup or anything. So I really enjoyed the game aspect of playing. My dad taught me poker when I was younger, just for fun, like five-card draw. But the money part was always interesting to me, that I could play a game against my friends and win money.
Mm.
So yeah, that's how it kind of started, is for fun with friends. And then my friend Grimstar at the time, he got into online poker and had some success. And I saw that and thought, okay, well, this seems like a fun thing to make money from. Let me try my best to see if I can do that too. So I got into online poker slowly but surely. And from there, it kind of just cascaded into, getting serious about it, looking up strategy, joining 2+2, watching videos from Deuces Cracked and Card Runners and trying to better my game. And yeah, eventually becoming a pro.
Nice. You were a mixed game player for most of your career, is that right?
Yeah. So when I first started out playing, I I actually started playing Heads Up Sit and Goes online, because that's what Grimstar played. He played Heads Up No Limit Hold'em. And
Okay.
so I thought that's how you make money, because he was making lots of money. And so I started playing these. Also, it's what I knew from playing Sit and Goes with my friends. So I played these Heads Up Sit and Goes on full tilt for like $2 entry fees or whatever. And I just kept getting destroyed. I wasn't very good, I just kept reloading my money. I had tilt problems. I didn't have a strategy. But here I was thinking, okay, if Grimstar can do this, I can do this. Like, I'm just gonna keep depositing until I build up a bankroll. And I just got sick of it after a while. I just got sick of like depositing and then losing my $100 or $50 or whatever. Um, and so I started trying some new games like for fun. And when I was first trying to build my bankroll, they would run all these free rolls on Full Tilt Poker at the time. And they would have like 9,000 players in these free rolls, but they were free rolls, so I would always play them. And so they would have different games every night for the free roll. And sometimes it was Raz, sometimes it was Stud High, sometimes it was Horse. And I had never played these games before, but of course it's a free roll. So I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'll just learn as I play these free rolls.
Yeah.
And so in order to like try and build my bankroll from these free rolls, I learned all these different games. And then slowly that evolved into like getting more interested in Raz and Stud because I just thought they were more interesting at the time, you know. You get more cards, you get to see more cards. It's a fixed limit bet. So like I didn't have to think too much about what size do I want to make it.
Yeah.
So my main focus could just be on do I bet or do I check?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I kind of enjoyed the novelty that was Raz of how simplistic it was of a game, but how you could still make money from people and how bad people actually were at the game despite it being simple. So it was a good game for me because at the time, like I said, I didn't really have a strategy. I didn't have any kind of like ambition to like study the game or whatever. I just wanted money. So I was
Yeah.
like, okay, this is a simple game, simple premise. People are bad at it. I can just wait till I have this hand or this hand and then put money in and just win. So that was attractive, but
This
at
is
the same time, so was the format.
this is hilarious to hear you say, given that I think you approach No Limit Hold'em in one of the more complex ways of people that
Yeah.
I know. So it's just funny the you're like, yeah, this was a simple game, and yet I hear yeah, I've heard you talk, and I want to get into this. We don't have to get into it now, but I want to get into the nuance of how you approach Hold'em. But yeah, so before we get into that, what did you eventually find success in any particular game, or did you just then start playing like yeah, mixed game tournaments? What was the path forward from there?
Yeah, so first I'll talk a little bit about the simplicity of the games because I think that's really interesting. I think that the more simple you make a game, the more um you can, you know, understand the complexity of poker
Yeah.
in a way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, it does.
using toy games really helped me understand how complex poker can get
Yeah.
just by understanding the like fundamental ideas of like, okay, sometimes I should check here, sometimes I should bet here. Why do I sometimes check here? Why do I sometimes
Yeah.
bet here? And then like going deeper on that. And then with like Raz and Stud, there was usually like some kind of an answer for me. Whereas No Limit Hold'em, it felt like it was just too complex of a game to start
Mhm.
with by like figuring out the fundamentals.
Yeah.
And it felt like I was just clicking buttons a lot of the time. But
Yeah.
like Stud, it was like, okay, I start off with a pair of nines when the board has a, you know, an eight on it as the highest card. That just like that strategically already makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
So it's easier for me to kind of like grasp the concepts quick and become better than other people because they wouldn't even think that far ahead, right? They would
Yeah.
just think like, okay, I have this hand. I want to play this hand. I'm going to play this hand.
Yeah.
So it kind of like Stud kind of naturally gave you rule sets in a way if you were to just like look at the board texture and look at your hand and think, how does my hand compare to the board texture? It was kind of like a starting hand chart
Mm.
in its own right because you just saw, okay, I have the best card on my on my up card. Everyone else has this card. This is probably a good spot to like to raise. But like No Limit Hold'em, it's like you get dealt two cards and you're in the small blind and it's like, okay,
I
yeah,
see.
I can pretty much raise any hand. I think. I don't
Yeah.
know. Let me
Yeah.
try this. So
It
yeah,
seems much more arbitrary in No Limit Hold'em. It's like what's good enough, what's a good opening hand, and why. It's like, well, this is what's good, and because is
yeah,
kind of like
exactly.
how.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it wasn't really until we got solvers for like pre-flop stuff that people started saying, "Oh, we're not supposed to open like, you know, King
Yeah.
4 offsuit in the early position or something,"
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Sure.
we didn't really have a guide until that came out really, or if you wanted to look at your old databases and figure out which hand was actually making you money. There was
Sure.
like a bunch of different ways of doing it, but yeah, stud seemed a little bit more direct to me. It's like, okay, I have this
Mm.
card, they have this card, I'm going to open now because
Yeah.
I just have a lot of equity. But yeah, so I really put a lot of effort into stud at that point because it was so appealing to me. Um, and so I joined the 2+2 stud forum and posted like every single day. And then I read 7 card stud for advanced players.
Mhm.
I read any piece of stud material I could find. And really the 7 card stud for advanced players was enough for me to feel like I had an edge on everybody. Because no one was really reading stud books.
Yeah, sure.
They knew they existed, right? But no one, first of all, no one really played stud seriously
Yeah.
online. There weren't too many other pros other than myself. And I would say maybe a hand like 20 players max in a
Yeah.
pool of, hundreds at the time. Um, so what happened was I started playing stud and Raz at 25 cent, 50 cent, and eventually moved up in stakes one at a time. So I literally started with like, no money, built up 25 cent, 50 cent, went to 50 cent, a dollar. And this is limit. So like that's really small stakes. 25
Yeah.
cent, 50 cent is, a $5 buy-in. Um, and so yeah, I built up through that all the way up to like 10, 20 limit, which is more of like it's a $200 buy-in, $400 buy-in. And then from there, I was just kind of able to make a living.
Uh,
There was a 30-60 study game that ran on Poker Stars eventually that I really wanted to play someday. And so I built myself up until I could play that. Um, Same thing with Full Tilt Poker. They had like a 100, 200 Raz game. That was pretty big stakes. That took me a while to get to, but
that's like a 10,
eventually
20 kind of equivalent today of like playing like Hold'em or
I would say it's like 2040,
2040. Okay.
the 100, 200 Raz, because it's like a 4K buy-in, and
Gotcha.
you can win or lose like 5 figures pretty easily in that game.
Gotcha.
Um, but yeah, my path through poker, like you were asking, is kind of just zigzagged. I was always jumping from game to game. I was learning different games at the same time as like just playing whatever games I could find. So like some months I would be a Raz pro, some months I'd be a stud pro, some months I would play no limit hold'em full ring.
Mm.
Yeah, it
Do you,
kind of
do you think at the
went
time it
everywhere.
was partially due to just like not what was your motivation for shifting around so much? Was it just like not wanting to stick with one thing? Like, did you have a little bit of just like ADHD with it, or like or do you or were
Yeah.
you just like all of these games seem good, like I'll just play whatever feels good, or was it a lack of discipline in your mind?
Well, definitely the latter one.
Yes.
But I think it was just a combination of what interested me at the time,
Yeah,
what I was running good at,
sure.
you know. I
You
wasn't
love
really.
stud until you started running bad, and then you're like, Raz it
Yeah.
is.
Well, the thing was I started off with Raz
Okay.
and I kept getting dealt stud hands in Raz. And so for those that don't know, it's kind of an opposite game, like where Raz you try and make the worst hand, stud you try and make the best hand. So in Raz I was getting dealt really good hands in stud and I was just getting so sick of it. I decided to play stud that day,
This is such
right?
a
Because I was
sick,
like,
like, this is such a sick needle. Like,
yeah. No, I had no logic back then. I was very emotional. I was very like, driven by whatever felt good at the time.
yeah.
Very unprofessional, but the
But fate's
games were
needling
so
you.
good. Yeah, the
Yeah.
games were so good, and I was able to still just make money.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
Even despite my weird like, okay, if I'm getting dealt stud hands all day, I'm gonna play stud.
That's so that's just such a funny like I get how that could be mentally torturous though. Like it's as though if there was an equivalent thing for Hold'em, I could see how if you were new to a game being like it's just like it's like a subtle needle every time you get dealt a good stud hand
Right.
and you're playing Raz, you're just like, well, I should be playing. I mean, it's so easy for your brain to pull those tricks on you.
Yeah.
If you're not already disciplined and like fairly emotionally mature, that sounds pretty needling, like pretty
Yeah.
tilting. Uh
And then eventually, you get dealt no stud hands and no Raz hands, and then now I'm playing stud eight or better,
yeah.
right? So like it was an evolution, right? So I learned almost every game. Like,
Uh,
yeah.
that's funny. What yeah, so Raz, I'm actually not familiar with Raz. I know you're trying to make a bad hand, but I'm not actually familiar with the like the streets of play. It is stud, like it's just like 7 card stud, or is it like
Yeah,
um
the format's the same. So in
okay,
Raz, you're dealt 2 cards down, 1 up,
okay.
same as stud high, and you're dealt a card 4 times from there. So you're dealt 3 more cards up and
And one
then
more
the
down.
last card down.
Okay.
So you get a total of 7 cards.
Perfect.
And you're trying to make the worst possible hand in Raz, which is ace 2, 3, 4, 5. Ace is low.
Oh, I see the wheel. Like the wheel would be the
Yeah.
worst
So the
possible hand.
wheel is the best hand in Raz.
Okay.
And then stud, obviously, it's the same as no limit hold'em hand rankings.
Do you dabble in these games at all anymore? Like, is there anywhere you can play these games or?
No. So I played them for a really long part of my career,
Yeah,
and eventually they dried up.
yeah,
So that is what brought me to No Limit Hold'em, essentially, is that I just couldn't find games consistently. I noticed the ladder for the mixed games fell apart, meaning, when you're playing No Limit Hold'em and you're building a bankroll, you start playing at 1 cent, 2 cent, and then you move up to 2 cent, 5 cent, and then you move up to 10 cent, 20 cent, or whatever. There's like
yeah,
always a limit for you to reach, right?
yeah.
Um, so when I was playing mixed games, I was kind of a mid stakes grinder. Well, mid stakes at the time, I guess now it'd be considered high stakes, but mid stakes at the time. So like 10-20 to 20-40
Yeah.
and 40-80. 40-80 was a pretty big game, but my main game was like 20-40, which was equivalent to 5-10 no limit. And that was a great game. It was always running. It was always good. I could always depend on it to build up my bankroll if I wanted to take shots at 40-80 and move up. The goal for me was to get to 400, 800 online. That was like that was the where all the crushers were. That's where you could make millions of dollars a year if you were good. And I always aspired to that. But unfortunately, over time, mixed games just started dying out. Obviously, Black Friday happened, really killed all of the action there. And the middle games just dropped away. So there was only like maybe some 10-20, which was too low for me at the time. And then 400, 800, or like 1K, 2K, which was a really, really big game.
Yeah.
And so it was really difficult to find any action at mixed games to be able to build up my bankroll. So I got so sick of like trying to, find these games that I could even play responsibly, um, which, I ended up skirting because I just didn't want to play responsibly. I just wanted to build my bankroll. So I would take shots at these higher games, and
Oh
that would
man.
obviously, be very volatile.
Yeah.
Um, and so the best way for me to skirt all of that, to be a professional poker player, and not put myself at risk of going broke, was to play a more consistent game that had a ladder that I could climb. So that was between, PLO and No Limit Hold'em, and I chose No Limit Hold'em.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, what made you choose Hold'em over PLO? Given your story, it seems like you would choose PLO. Would be if I were to predict, like based on everything you just said.
Yeah, so I was a PLO pro after the mixed games died,
Okay.
for a couple of years. And I did really well, actually. I climbed the ladder of PLO all the way from 25 cent, 50 cent, all the way up to 25.50. Um, and I was playing like 25.50 in the Zoom pool. Believe it or not, they had 25.50 Zoom on
Jesus.
Poker Stars. Um, so that shows how, good the games were back then. They had an actual 25.50 pool at all.
Yeah.
Now it's like 2.5 is the biggest game that ever runs. But yeah, my dream was to, play 25.50 and, you know, become I'm always a cheat trying to look for the highest game if you can't tell. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was playing with like
Aren't we all?
Galfond and Ben 86 and Isildur and all those guys. They're all playing in this like 25.50 pool. And so I would build up my bankroll with 10-20 PLO on the Zoom, and then take shots at 25.50, lose at 25.50, go back down to 10-20, and just repeat it. Um, until eventually, no discipline, you know, tilt busted my bankroll. had to rebuild, was thinking like, oh my God, PLO has been so volatile. So like maybe I should find a game that's a little bit more, less
Less variance.
variance. Um, and so I started playing Heads Up PLO. Uh, and so I built my bankroll again playing Heads Up PLO,
Isn't that way
which
more volatile?
yeah, it was a terrible decision, but I was good at it and I was able to win. And so yeah, then
Oh my
eventually
goodness.
again busted the rule, but yeah, now I'm playing No Limit Hold'em.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say, so I switched to No Limit Hold'em. That was a good punchline.
Mm.
Um, dude, this is such like, how has this been emotionally as a journey for you? Like you've been really around the poker blocks, where are you at now? Like what's your relationship with poker like? I mean, you must still love it, like, but do you feel like you've grown a lot as a person throughout all of this? And like, what have you learned about yourself and life, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't made it easy for myself. I think my career, I've never really buckled down and been disciplined with bankroll management, with
Mm,
spending habits, with all sorts of things within poker.
yeah.
So it took me a long time and a lot of trial by fire to come to where I am now, which I'd like to think I'm more responsible now, and I'm more disciplined. Uh, but yeah, I've kind of been through the ringer. I've experienced almost everything you can experience in poker.
Yeah.
Um, building up big bankrolls, losing big bankrolls, emotionally just like feeling awful, thinking I'm not going to play any more poker. Um, you know, I've been through it all. So like that really that really helped me become who I am today. It sounds corny, but like
Oh, of course.
I get what it takes now to become successful.
Yeah.
And it really took me like touching the fire multiple times to understand like you can't keep touching the fire. It's gonna burn you every single time. So yeah, I think that
Sorry.
was, a big driver in me becoming better in different aspects of my game, which unfortunately, I had a lot of friends early on that were very successful.
Mm,
And if I had just kind of like listened to them,
sure.
or I had a little bit more guidance uh, in my poker career, maybe I would have listened. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I kind of I just wish someone had like a blueprint for me that I just followed, instead of
Yeah.
having to like go through every mistake possible and being like, yeah, that wasn't a good idea. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and then repeating those mistakes because, there's no quick fix for a lot of it. You kind of
Yeah.
have to work hard consistently on on your mind game,
Yeah.
or your mental game, I should say, on your strategy, understanding variance, understanding bankroll management. Like that's a consistent thing. There's no just like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, well, I do this once and forever I'm good at it. Or at
You don't
least for
walk through
me anyway.
the gates to the green pastures of winning player like that.
Yeah,
That's
like it
yeah.
doesn't you don't just go to one side and all of a sudden you're a
You're just
forever winning
coasting.
player and
Hey.
everything is easy. Like you always have to work at the game.
Yeah, that's I remember multiple times upon like trying to like beat the online pools because I was a live player before, and like when I switched online, I would like experience just like a good upswing and think like, oh, this is it. Like this is the moment now. Now I could just get to coast. Like, I just get to like coast and play and I don't have to work on anything anymore. And
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Quite
It's
the
this.
opposite, actually. Like once you get to the green pastures of high stakes, you have to work even harder.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious because you said like now you know what it means to be successful. Like what is success to you? Like do you feel yourself being just as ambitious as you were back then in terms of like trying to play in bigger and bigger games, or do you find yourself being a bit more settled and just like I'm just trying to make a living and be happy, and or where do you like what is your long-term goal in poker at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think my long-term goal is still what it's always been, is to reach the highest stakes I can reach.
Mm.
Um, and I usually find that I have a higher ceiling um than I think what most settle for. Uh, which might sound a little cocky, which
Oh,
it probably is. Part of my ego is there for sure, but um I think that yeah, I got into poker initially because it was interesting. I like the game. I like playing with friends. I like the social aspect of it. Um, it was like it was a game I could share with all of my friends and we could talk about or make moments from. And from that it grew to like more of a strategy thing. Like I'm a very competitive person. I like to be good at stuff. And poker is a very deep game that you can continuously get better at. So like I never have a lack of things to get better at. Um, and so success to me is kind of like becoming the best poker player that I can be. And that is kind of a combination of being the best at strategy, as well as, building a bankroll, because the higher you play, the more difficult strategy becomes, the more in depth you can get, the more, success you're going to have if you're good at it. So
Mm.
it's just kind of to me, it's like it's a game, right? Like at its core, poker is a game. And if you're good at the game, you're going to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And the money is just like a nice byproduct from it. When I was younger, I think it was more the opposite. I was thinking of it as like the money part instead of a game.
Mm.
Um, and I was just trying to make money.
Yeah.
And that cost me a lot of money, right? Um,
Yeah.
because I would always try and just chase the money. I wouldn't respect the game. I
Yeah.
wouldn't respect that there's a lot of strategy involved and I need to keep getting better. And there's a lot of, management of your money involved, and I wouldn't do that. And so that would often cause a lot of variance in my life. But once I've understood, okay, if I just study and I'm super disciplined and I'm just going to try and get better as a player, the
Yeah.
money just comes with it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
I
true. I
think,
mean,
yeah.
it's a weird thing to that's a good point because it's a weird thing to kind of describe to people when it's like I've told people before, like you're too fixated on your win rate, and people are like, well, isn't that how you win? Is like by having a good win rate. But yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Where it's like, yeah, your win rate is sort of like a byproduct. It's like this. It's the effect of you doing well in this game, and like you're not focusing enough on just playing the game well. Like you're focusing too much on this metric of your win rate, or like yeah, or for tournament players like your ROI or like how much you're making or like etc. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's a valuable point.
And I think to touch on that, I'm a big proponent. There was, some talk about showing graphs in the community lately, right? About sharing your win rate, about how much you're beating the games for, and all that stuff. And I think early in my career, I was really like, no graph, no win rate, right? Like you got to show graph. That was like a big part of the community back in the day. It was like, oh, what's your graph look
Sounds
like?
like a fun euphemism. Show graph.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, uh, yeah, not in that way, but
Yeah.
uh it it was kind of, toxic in a sense of like,
Yeah.
okay, like you were more worried about having a good graph or having a strong, win rate, that you weren't focused on actually trying to be good at the game.
Yeah.
And so when I started building my community on Twitch, I initially started streaming on Twitch because I wanted to hold myself responsible for getting better at the game.
Mm.
I didn't care about becoming a streamer. I just wanted to study and create like a community that would like join me
Yeah.
um, in getting better at poker. And so I would stream myself originally just like doing Pio Sims and trying to get better and like looking at different software, and I had like 10 max viewers maybe. And it was very boring and there was no content really. It was just me like looking at a Pio screen for like 5 hours, right?
For sure.
Um, but like the emphasis that I put on then just studying and becoming a better player is what really allowed me to start becoming better at the game and making money consistently, because it's so easy to lie to yourself in poker.
Yeah.
Um, to, say like, oh yeah, like I'm a crusher or I'm, doing great, and you're only winning at like 1 BB per 100. Um, and you kind of want to just like prove to other people that you're a winner, right? Like you want to
Yeah.
be like, yeah, like I'm crushing the games, but like maybe you're not. Like what's your sample size? What's everything look like? And
Yeah.
like focusing on results, I think, is just the opposite of what you should be doing if you want to be successful. And so like on my stream, I never show my results. I never show my graphs. Well, I show daily graphs, but I don't show long-term graphs or I've been in poker for a long time. Like if I had a graph of what my results were, it would be, over 3 million, 4 million hands
Right.
or something like that. And it's hard to actually get, but I don't show all that stuff because when I was focusing on showing that stuff and when people come into the stream and they're like, "Oh, what's your graph? What's your win rate?" Like that's the wrong mindset. Like
Yeah.
that's not going to be, if you want to get better at poker, don't think about that stuff. Like ask me questions about how much should I study? Ask me questions about what
Yeah.
should I study? Ask me like what my routine looks like. Ask me like, what should I specifically think about in hands, right? Like
Yeah.
think like all these things that are actually going to help you rather than just seeing like, oh, this is my win rate. This is how well I'm doing. Like I must be a winner. Like,
Yeah.
but like you don't know how I'm a winner. Like the way you learn is actually just tuning in, like and listening to my thought process. And if it sounds good and it makes sense, I think you can figure out that I'm a winner from that.
Yeah. I mean, also, it's just like, it's a weird, I always thought it was like a weird statement about any person that's like, are you a winner? And it's like, well, you just have to like, over what period of time? Like there's hands that I play that are certainly losing, right? So like that hand was that I was a loser in that hand. Like I'm playing that hand poorly. Like not even from a results perspective, just from like the way I approach that spot will make me lose money in that spot. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
then but then if my value to me, like I view my value as a player to me is the fact that like I believe I'm adaptable. So it's like in spots where I'm losing, I'm going to be willing to learn over time. And yeah, it's just also just like a weird mindset. If I do this, I talk about this when I coach with people because there's so much pressure on this obsession with win rate trickles into people's game in the sense that they feel so much pressure while playing to be making a decision that's representative of a winning player, right? It's like I need to be a winning player in all moments at all times. Like I need to, encapsulate this embodiment of someone who's winning or crushing. And like
Yeah.
I have no flexibility, but but really like being a winning player again, it's like your response to situations where you make mistakes and then like how do you update and like then in the future you will be winning a little bit more than you are now. And it's like we're not
Right.
really we're never just like encapsulated as like this monolith that is like you are a winner or you are a loser. It's like no, you are progress. You are this continuum of change over your entire career. And the question is that continuum pointing the direction that is pointing up? Like, are you getting better or are you getting worse? And yeah, the good way to get worse is to constantly feel this sense of tension and pressure around your win rate. And a good way to get better is like you're saying, is just to focus on the things that matter, which is just putting in the time, getting experience, mental game, treating yourself well, caring about your well-being and just moving in that direction.
Right. I
Yeah.
think winning is like a mindset.
Yeah.
It's not typically what you're exactly doing, but it's how you think about everything and
Yeah.
how if you do something wrong, that you're willing to work hard and fix it, right?
Yeah.
Like you might be a 1 BB winner one week, but then you're going to be a 1.5 BB winner the next week, then
Yeah.
2 BBs the next week, right? Like
Or yeah,
so,
or even sometimes for me, it's when I'm playing, it's even more drastic than that. Like sometimes I feel like I'm really in the zone and I'm like, dude, I got to be crushing this pool right now. Like I'm in it, I'm making great decisions. And then next week I'm a little less with it and I'm breaking even or losing because I'm just not playing well, And it's just like you're just going to yeah, it's gonna be a wave. Like you're going to move around. There's variance in your own skill. It's not just like you don't just show up and perform at your A game every single day. Um,
right. And yeah, like
yeah,
that's typically why throughout my career, um, the times that I feel like I was the most confident in myself and my ability is when I was the least uh driven by ego. Like I was
yeah,
the least like, worried about having myself
prestige.
perceived as like a
Yeah,
crusher or something like that. And I
yeah,
was just literally studying every day and working hard at the game. Like I can pinpoint a couple of times in my career where I was doing everything right and it just led to success.
Yeah.
Whereas I was like doing everything wrong, and it just clearly led to a lot of variance and failure. And so like I've realized that the process is what you have to focus on the
Yeah.
most. And so the times where I'm just like worrying about studying and worrying about getting better at the game, not thinking about my results, is
Yeah.
when you just have the best results.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so that's how I've always been successful, and that's when I feel the least of like an imposter, like
Yeah.
it feels like, okay, I'm confident in myself. I can actually study and work hard and get the hands in every day. And look, here's my results after a year. Wow, I am consistent because
Yeah.
I've been doing XYZ this whole time.
What's so, yeah, I mean, this makes me think of like the graph sharing thing when people like show up and like this, like I can completely emotionally empathize with why someone coming into your stream, given everything you've said to me, and why it would make you uncomfortable wanting to share graphs and win rates. But it's such a nuanced like explanation, and it's not going to be something that you can explain quickly or concisely to people. And
Yeah,
that's
for
why
sure.
I was like, when I was on Charlie's stream, I was like, we should just, if people don't want to share, we should extend them the benefit of the doubt that they have a reason why they don't want to share.
Right.
And the hilarious thing, I'm not even, whatever, I'm not even gonna get myself pulled into this again. But yeah, for you, it does. I mean, like, given everything you said, it just makes complete sense to me that, like, yeah, the person who's fixated on sharing graphs makes me feel like the type of person that doesn't perform the best when playing. So I want to avoid that kind of focus. So when you come in and ask for
Exactly.
graphs, I'm not going to share them.
Right.
And that, like, that just, yeah, that makes complete sense to me.
And it's not also for like it's not necessarily for even the viewers. It's
Yeah,
for myself too.
exactly. Yeah,
If I start sharing my results, I'm going to start worrying about what other people think of my results. I'm going to
exactly.
start like worrying about what my graph looks like when I share it, like what people are going to say or think, or
Yeah,
it's something I want to avoid dealing with, that
yeah,
it makes me more focused on the study. Like that's the whole purpose of my stream. Like if my purpose of my stream was to grow my stream and to sell a course, like yeah,
yeah,
maybe I'll show you guys my graph,
yeah,
because that's to get people hooked into thinking that you're good. You got to show them something that shows that you've been successful. That's harder to show people,
yeah,
over like immediately. You can't do that
yeah,
immediately. You have to kind of build the community slowly, which is what I've been doing. But like,
yeah,
um, yeah, if you wanted to attract the most people the quickest, in the title, I'll just be like, oh, I'm a 10 BB per 100 crusher. Like,
yeah,
come watch my stream, and then buy my course,
yeah,
right? Or whatever. Like,
yeah,
that's just not my goals. And so like I said before, I've always noticed when I'm doing my best, I'm not thinking about results. I'm not sharing my results. I'm not, you know, looking at my red line and thinking, damn, like I wish my red line was higher or lower or whatever,
yeah,
right? Like it's just,
yeah,
so yeah, that's what I focus on. And
yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, even so, when I would post my monthly results every month in my Discord for my community when I was streaming. I'm gonna get back to streaming because I miss it a lot. But when I was streaming, I was posting my monthly results, and I had a bad downswing one month, and it was really emotionally difficult for me. Like it was difficult to know that like I got to post this, and a lot of these people like they look up to me, and like they look up to me as this person, and even though it's just like down months just happen, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like it just happens. But for me, it was actually tough. Like it was actually like, man, I don't want to post this. So
right.
I definitely get that as like a motivator for not doing that because it did not feel good.
I
Um,
mean, that's the other side too, is like, yeah, it's easy to post graphs when you're winning, but like, are you going to post graphs when you're losing too? Like, you're going to
yeah,
have losing months. It happens all the time to pros. Like,
yeah,
um, like, are you going to update and be honest with everybody? And then you have to explain to people, like, no, I think I'm just running bad,
yeah,
right? Like, now you have to start
yeah,
talking about your results to other people, which is very difficult to do because you know more than everyone else, like what's going on with your game at the current time. Like, is it run bad? Is it playing bad?
yeah.
There's a lot of like ins and outs of graphs, which just
It's just a
make things
vulnerable thing to be do.
negative.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
a vulnerable thing to be doing, and like that's what I think. Like people who don't stream and don't like aren't in this position don't really understand. Like it's just a very vulnerable place for you to put yourself in, and like it's tough. Like people talk to me, like, let's say I had that down month, right? And then it's like people are asking me like what's going on. And the truest answer is I don't know. Maybe I'm
Yeah,
playing
that's
bad. Like I just don't know, right? Like I don't know. But like, yeah, it's tough. It is a tough thing. And that's why, like, when having been through that now, whenever people talk about like should everyone be sharing their results or whatever, I'm just like, dude, it's a very vulnerable thing to insist on people that they do. Like, it's just it's already a lot. Like all of us already associate a lot of our identities with how we are as poker players. Like, and it's a lot to just like put yourself on the line for the internet, like, because they're often so kind, right?
yeah,
Like for just the blank mob that is out there, to just be open to criticize what is like one of the deepest and most important things to you. And it's a lot. It's a lot. And so like I completely understand anybody who's just like, no, I'm just not sharing this. Like,
right.
I really empathize. We're picking up this conversation because the conversation last time about this topic was not done in a super clear and constructive way. I would say both of us we're just not, we kind of ended up talking about something that probably is worth a more careful pass over than we gave it. I think is a fair way of putting it.
Yeah,
So yeah. So and that's my fault because I am the host. And so, but I guess what we're gonna talk about, and I am curious your thoughts on, and I'm curious to like flesh out the nuance here and like and to get in somewhat of where where the crux of this disagreement is how you approach the game strategically, like how you think about improving your game, and like what is your, like what is the path of progress you envision for yourself as a poker player, and how you navigate that path of progress. Because I think for you it differs from many of the other players that I discuss with. I won't say all of them. I think there are a lot that feel similarly to you. But there are, basically it's the difference between this idea of like it's well as crystallized in multiple flop bet sizes, right? Like that's just a good way. It's not the entirety of it, but this can be a good example point of how most players that I know approach trying to play theoretically correctly through the lens of simplification, right? Like trying to play GTO is very difficult and some would say impossible. And so the best we can do is simplify G, game theoretic optimal strategies, and then to something that is like humanly understandable. And so we basically compress the strategy in a way that reduces the amount, like in the ways that cost us the least amount of EV, and we execute the simplified strategy. You
sure.
seem to take a different approach, and I'm curious what led to that approach, and what you believe the strengths of it are over trying to play a more simplified strategy.
So yeah, what you're referring to is, as you mentioned, a lot of players like to simplify when it comes to studying with solvers and reducing the amount of bet sizes that they have, so that they can become more accurate with their strategy. Whereas in reality, the solver, if you give it a lot of sizings, will use a lot of different sizings. So
Yeah.
a lot of players like to simplify in spots. They pick one or two sizings per street, and that's the strategy that they study and they go with. For me, I think my poker strategy started with simplifying, with trying to make it as easy as possible for myself. And then over time, as I continued to study and I worked with solvers, I was really interested in using different sizings because I started to see the value of switching up sizings to having a large over bet size, to have an over bet size, to have a large size, a medium size, a small size, and a lot of different scenarios. And I feel like there's a couple of reasons why I like it in practice as well. The first one is it's really hard to play against as an opponent if I am using multiple sizings in different scenarios, because you're going to have to be
well-rounded and studied in a lot of those sizings in order to understand on the fly how to react to it. Like, can you approximate a strategy versus a sizing you're not familiar with? Sure. But you're more prone to errors when you're facing a sizing you haven't studied in depth. And then also, I feel like there's a lot of spots where the solver just doesn't want to simplify. There's a lot of scenarios where a lot parts of your range want to have a large bet, parts of your range want to have a small bet, and parts of your range want to have an overbet. And understanding how to construct those, not only in theory, are higher EV than simplifying in that spot,
Yeah.
but also you allow yourself to learn more in depth about how the solver organizes different hands into different sizings. And it's a fun learning experience if you're trying to get better and to find an edge on the competition, because the games that I'm playing right now, which are medium stakes and we're roughly 500 NL, they are tough games today. And so oftentimes to find that extra edge, it really helps to have a deeper understanding of your strategy, of theory, of how to use sizings and how to respond to sizings. And so I think naturally, as you're getting better and better, you're more interested in complicating your strategy. So I think I started off with the simplified strategies, and then as I became more studied, as I looked more in depth into some spots which are using multiple sizings, I found it interesting, and it was
Yeah.
motivating for me to study and to implement it into my own game. Like, am I perfect at implementing it? I don't think so, but I do think that overall my game is going to be more well-rounded and hard to play against than someone who's just simplifying uh, their frequencies with one sizing or two sizings.
Mm. Yeah, and it's worth saying too that you made this clear before we started recording, but that like you're not against the simplification approach. Like you're not taking like a hard line against people simplifying or
Right.
something. Like you get the benefits of it. You think that. I mean, I think it's good to note that like you find it interesting and motivating because that's a value in and of itself. Like there's like a even let's say I don't think you think this, but let's say it was slightly less EV to do what you're doing. That EV could be recaptured by the motivation you get to just approach the
Right.
game in that way, right? That's definitely an important variable that shouldn't be overlooked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also one thing I didn't mention, but
Yeah.
is another reason why I really liked choosing my path over using a more simplified strategy. I saw a picture a while ago where I don't know if it was I don't want to say a name, but someone posted a picture of a certain solver uh, or a certain software company that simplified a lot of the decision tree, and they promoted it as, okay, this is like a more simplified strategy. It's going to be easier to execute and all that stuff, all of the standard arguments for simplifying strategy. And they showed the EV of it. And another uh, I think it was a software company. I can't remember who it was, but it's not the point. Point is, they showed a mixed strategy with a more complicated set of sizings. And they showed that even if you weren't as accurate in that strategy, it was still overall higher EV, and it was still more representative of what the game tree looks like in game theory. So like there was a picture of like a target. Some people might know what I'm talking about or referencing, but there's a picture of a target, and the simplified strategy is like up and to the left of the target, but it's a very small cluster of darts, right?
Mm,
Of areas
it's
where it's
tight.
hitting. So
Yeah.
it's a very tight cluster, so it's very accurate.
Mm,
And the game tree is solved down to a high accuracy, but it's missing the target. It's missing the middle, which when you take a more complicated strategy and solve it to a less a weaker accuracy. So I
mm,
think in something like PIO or GTO plus, you solve down to like, 0.025 or 0.25 or 0.5 or whatever it is that you choose, right?
Yeah.
And the simplified strategy, simplified down to like 0.1, that was the image of like the everything being close together and accurate, but missing the target. And then the other solution of like 0.25 accuracy was everything was around the middle target, right?
Yeah.
Like even though you had a bit of inaccuracies, they still weren't like super far away from the target. And so that's kind of like an image that represents using a more complicated strategy, even if the accuracy isn't on point.
Yeah, I think it's
That's yeah.
I think it's a false analogy in my opinion. Like I know you're I'm not I know you're not like super interested in like having a debate on this topic. Um my only interest in like pushing back against some of the things you said is I think like in the interest of people who might listen to this, I think it's just I feel that it's not ideal to approach the game the way you do. And so my only interest in pushing against it is like I feel like it's because I'm going to publish it, like it's my responsibility to put both cases out there, if you will,
Sure.
right, of like the benefits of this, because to your points of like it's harder to play against, I would argue I would strongly argue it's easier to play against. I think the more decisions you give somebody at the flop, the more imbalanced people become down the game tree in predictable ways, in my opinion. Like when playing against somebody who's mixing a lot of sizes, that doesn't intimidate me. That makes me feel better and personally. Now you could be the exception to that and you could be good at it and like other people could be worse at it. That's possible. But in my general feeling is like if you told me I'm going to play someone who's playing a simplified strategy or someone who's playing multiple flop sizes, even if they were simplifying after that, I would feel much better playing the person who's playing multiple flop sizes because they have increased the size of the game tree for themselves exponentially. And the likelihood that they're playing the points after that point of the game tree well, I view as very unlikely. And so like I feel like there will be a ton of EV captured post flop, like not post flop, but like literally actually after the flop. That will be not captured by someone who's playing a more simplified strategy. Is like my first thing that I think is pointing out. What was your second point again? I'm just trying to remember right now because I got caught up on the third one the picture you were describing. You found it
Just
motivating.
the idea that, you know, you're going to be able to learn a lot more about game theory through
Oh.
studying complex strategies and understanding how to implement them.
Yeah, and this is complicated. Like I don't agree with this either. I think what we mentioned this in our first pass of this, but I think whatever you gain from studying multiple sizes on one flop, you gain from studying multiple sizes on separate flops. Like I think the game theory implications you get from a size on a flop are roughly the same. And in fact, I actually think you get less noise and more signal, and I actually think you can learn that easier that way. Speaking from experience, like I found solutions with multiple sizings deeply confusing about why one size was being used over another for a long time. And then it wasn't until I started simplifying that like the incentives pulling on hands to bet certain sizes in different spots started actually making sense to me. Once I was looking at solutions, once I started solving like I created a script that would create simplified solutions in Pio. And once I started doing that actually crystallized a lot for me. Like suddenly what wants to bet, medium, and what wants to bet small, and what wants to overbet started making a lot more intuitive sense to me. Is that point. And to your last point, I have a discrete example of how this is not true. The picture you painted with the targets, which is I work with these guys working on this app Ruse, and we played Slumbot, and Slumbot uses multiple sizings, and it assumes multiple sizings of its opponents, and it plays a complex strategy, and it won this big poker competition, and it would crush any person, like any human being who went to play Slumbot, it would destroy them. And we played it with Ruse, and we played it with a simplified strategy. Ruse would choose the single best size in a spot and just play that. And we beat it for 19 big blinds per 100, over 150K hands. So this is like an example of something solved poorly, but with multiple sizings. being annihilated by something playing simply with one size, but solved to a very high accuracy. So I think it's just like a discrete example of that not being true.
AI is a bit different than solvers, though.
Well, no.
Just,
So Slumbot is a solution lookup. Like it is a database basically. Like, yeah. So that's
Okay.
how it works. I mean, there are some limitations to it. It's not, but that's the nuts and bolts of how it works is a database lookup. So like it does some it does some like what's the word I'm looking for? Like some mathematical simple, like if you pick a size that's not in one of its sizes
It resolves it on
for
the fly.
you, it can't resolve on the fly because that's too
Oh, it
computationally
can't.
intense for that. That's what I'm saying. So it has a database of solutions basically that it's pulling
Oh,
from
yeah, that's
for
flawed.
itself. But if you pick a size that's not in its size, it can create a strategy for that size. I'm trying to remember what the mathematical method for it is. It's very accurate though. It's fairly reliably like accurate to be able to. It has like all the sizes, and it can aggregate this, like can create a mathematical average of what the strategy would be for the size that you picked.
Yeah.
That it's very good at. But its strategy is a database lookup. Like it's playing as a database lookup, and every time you pick a size that's in its database, it has that stored. So it's not an AI. And so it depends on how you define an AI. Like it's a bot, but like it's not solving on the fly. Ruse is solving on the fly. And yeah, so I mean, I just think this is a good example of how a strategy that is simple. Now, don't get me wrong, like there's possible that like the thing is that's interesting though is even when we play, this is within variance, this is not even a relevant data point. I was gonna say we played it with multiple sizings with Ruse as well, and we did worse than 19 big blinds per 100. But there's variance, so it's a meaningless data point. Like we did well enough, they're close enough to each other where one could be lower than the other in reality, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think it's interesting. I just yeah, I don't know how willing you are to go back and forth on this topic, because I find it interesting, but I also don't want to badger you about it.
I just don't really honestly, I don't understand enough about Ruse and Slumbot to comment on that.
Yeah.
But in general, like obviously simplifying has its merits, and I think most people have an easier time understanding the game when you simplify. So there's a lot of value, like you were saying, you kind of had a lot better understanding when you started to simplify. You could see clearly why you were choosing the sizes you were choosing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of benefits for simplifying as well. I personally just enjoy the complexity of trying to understand multiple sizings and the
Yeah.
solvers, and studying with AI is obviously kind of the next step in that. And it's just going to keep evolving. So I'm excited to see what what the AI that comes out with. There's obviously a lot of different AIs out there. Not all of them are public. So I think Ruse might be one of the first public AIs.
There's Deep Solver, which yeah, I think is kind of poor. And then there's like Prometheus, which is also kind of poor in my mind. Like they're not very good.
Are those publicly available to like purchase and use?
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
But they're not very good.
Yeah. So there's yeah, I'm excited to see what they put out, and I'm sure my studying is going to shift when I start learning how the AIs work inherently and understand
I mean,
what they're doing.
they still do CFR. I mean, look, we can talk about this a little because I'm somewhat educated on it given my position in Ruse. So they're still doing like a CFR. So like they're still doing counterfactual regret. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's how solvers determine their strategies, is with CFR. But where a solver is holding the entire game tree in memory, so it has to hold the whole game tree in its memory and like run down every path and then like adjust strategies. AIs predict future streets. They don't have to play them. So they've done that enough where they can predict the EV of future actions. So they just have to run the CFR on, like, if you're solving the flop, you only run CFR on the flop. So it's basically like solving a one street game. I'm
pretty familiar with how it works.
Oh, okay. I thought you said you didn't know. So
no, I was saying like I don't know to the degree of the differences of what Slumbot's doing and what
okay.
Ruse is doing and what Pluribus is doing
Pluribus,
and
yeah.
all those different ones. But they all, I think Pluribus was a breakthrough in that it simplified the CFR so that it was able to solve things on turn rivers to a very high accuracy very quickly. Whereas before it was like really hard for the AI to do that because of the bottleneck of all of the data
Yeah, so
that it had to run through.
yeah, in my opinion, Pluribus is like it's ancient compared to Ruse. Like Ruse is much more impressive than Pluribus in almost every way. Like, and I think if we could play Pluribus, which we can't, but a heads up implementation of Pluribus played Slumbot, and lost to Slumbot. So I think it just like shows the like Ruse is very very good. Naturally, I'm very proud of it because I work with the people, but yeah. Yeah, what I'm just curious, what is your answer to the idea though that like yeah, like you are objectively increasing the size of the game tree like a lot. I don't even know by how many fold, right? By adding multiple flop sizes, you're exponentially, and then especially if you have then multiple turn sizes, and then if you have multiple river sizes, right? Like you're now the size of the game tree is probably like I don't know how much larger, but like a factor of 1,000 more or something. Like it's probably like way larger than somebody who's not doing that.
Mhm.
Do you feel like that makes it less likely that you're performing after the flop as well as people who aren't doing that, or is that not a concern of yours?
It's not really a concern because if I ever have an issue trying to figure out multiple sizings, I know how to simplify. Um,
Mm,
so like it's not like the good thing
sure.
about learning a complex strategy is that it's a lot easier to simplify than it is to add a more complex strategy.
That's a good point.
So if I'm ever at a spot where it's like, oh, I don't know how often I need to frequency bet here, this small sizing, so that I can balance it with my all-in sizing, I can just choose an all-in sizing on that node and think, okay, I'm just not going to do this or I'm going to do this.
Sure. Sure.
When you add complexity and you add sizings, you are adding a different part of your range that you're not normally putting in that sizing bet with, right? So like it adds a whole part of a strategy in some scenarios. And if you're not sure if the hand that you're, holding is a good or bad all-in sizing, then it starts to, get a little tough. But if you know
Mhm.
for a fact it's not a good all-in sizing, and it's probably a check at a mix, and then it's also maybe a small bet because that would be the other sizing that you would use in that spot. Then you
Yeah.
can start thinking, oh, is this like a small sizing? Maybe this kind of makes sense. It's blocking XYZ from villain. It has these properties, so I'm going to put this in my small bet sizing. I'm
Mm,
not trying to like memorize any strategies in a lot of scenarios. I'm more so learning the fundamentals of theory and how the solver plays in a
mhm.
spot, like how it would think about, okay, so if I have X blocker with villain having X range or Y range, then I'm going to bet Z, right? Or something similar to that. So it's like a lot of my study isn't to try and memorize. It's more to
Yeah.
understand so that I can implement it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it anyway, right? Like you want to be able to like you want to be able to calculate on the spot what you think is the best thing to do. Like trying to
Right.
like recall something you've memorized is yeah, that's going to be there's the game is certainly too large for that approach, right? Like you can't be memorizing how to play every spot.
Right. You're not going to memorize every single scenario, but I do think the ability to calculate is possible. Like you can sit there and think, okay, this is my range. This is the part of my range that makes sense to have this sizing. I'm going to go with this sizing. And that's the advantage humans have over solvers, uh, is that you can come up with heuristics. You can
Yeah.
come up with simplifications about how the decisions are going to be made. So the solvers are working backwards and they're solving the entire game tree, trying to find the highest EV decision,
Yeah.
right? Whereas we're kind of working frontwards, where we're getting to the river And we're thinking, okay, now that we're at the river, now we're going to try and figure out, okay, is this hand plus EV to ever do X with, or should I check or whatever? So like there are some good things about being human in poker, is in that we're able to take very complex uh you know solutions and simplify them uh in a different way, not necessarily reducing the game tree, but coming up with these heuristics and coming up with these ideas of how to execute a complex strategy.
Would you recommend your approach to somebody who's not learning poker new, but let's say someone who's stuck at 50 and L? Like they're having a hard time moving up from
No,
50 and L. Okay. What about someone who's stuck
no,
at 200 and L?
no.
Okay.
I don't think if you're stuck anywhere that this is the way forward.
Yeah.
I think that this is more of like a lifetime pursuit for me,
Mm.
right? I think a lot of people are fixated on the short term. They're
Yeah.
trying to maximize their EV, they're trying to maximize their earnings, their hourly. They're doing everything they can because they want to just make the most amount of money they can.
Yeah.
I think personally, if I'm going to be in this game for a long time, you know, I've been in the game already for 15 years.
Yeah.
If I'm going to keep growing and playing this game, I think it's imperative that I'm challenging myself and I'm interested. You
Yeah.
know, like whenever these new AIs come out, I dive deep. I look at the way that they're solving them. I look at all the cool things that are happening with the progression of the AI, of solvers, of whatever. And that's what interests me in the game. Otherwise, I would probably just get bored trying to, maximize my hourly and four table and simplify my strategy and do XYZ. Like I don't know. I've always been against the grain in a lot of ways. Especially when it comes to metagame and how other players are approaching the game.
Sure.
Uh but I think this approach for me, it works. It's
Nice.
worked for a while. I really enjoy it. I think that's really important in poker. A lot of
Yeah.
players just kind of copy other people, or they become stagnant in their study. Like when you develop a very simplified strategy, you don't run out of things to study, but things start looking the same.
Sure.
Right, like, okay, I'm on button versus big blind. I use the overbet on the flop because I always use the overbet here. Now we're on the turn. Okay, I know I use this overbet. Okay, now I use this overbet. So it's like the game became a bit stagnant for me when I was simplifying,
Mm.
and I felt like the way forward for myself particularly was to complicate things and to use a more complex strategy, to add some bet sizings, to understand deeper how everything works.
Awesome. No, I think it's really great. I think it's a good point. I think it's a worthwhile point, like a more important point than all of this is. I think you should definitely approach the game in a way that you enjoy, and I think that gets brushed over far too much.
Right.
A lot of talk of like what you should sacrifice and like what you should, like how you need to like hustle and like all these things to like make it to the top or whatever. But there's no easier source of motivation than just enjoying what you're doing, right? Like this, just enjoying it's
Yeah.
really important. And so I think it's a really, really good point.